The announcement did not arrive with trumpets, ceremony, or cheering crowds. It came behind closed doors, inside a room where every word carried the weight of history. Prince William placed a sealed inheritance order on the table and confirmed the decision no one expected. Prince George would become the sole owner of Diana's secret estate. Across from him, Prince Harry remained completely still, stunned by a decision that appeared to erase him from his mother's hidden legacy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had summoned only those whose lives could be changed by the envelope. George sat beside Catherine, while Charles remained at the table and two senior trustees watched silently. An inheritance order, a legal document naming who receives and controls property, carried more than wealth here. It carried Diana's residence, protected archive, jewelry collection, and personal trust. No press officers stood nearby. No junior aides heard a word. Harry stared at the paper as though its meaning might change. It did not. The prince repeated, "Sole ownership," then pushed the signed order across the table. The duke's face tightened. George did not look proud. The young heir looked frightened by the pain gathering around him. He glanced toward his uncle, aware that one inheritance could reopen every wound between two brothers, still grieving the same woman. William removed his signet ring and placed it beside the document. A signet ring is a personal royal seal linked to identity and authority, making his next words final. He told Harry he was speaking not only as a brother, but as guardian of George's future. The Duke shoved his chair backward, yet refused to leave. Charles watched closely. Catherine reached for her son's hand, but George kept his eyes lowered. Then the future king revealed, through the trustee's documented account, that the decision had not been created that morning. Diana's estate had rested inside a dormant trust, a protected legal arrangement kept inactive until a stated condition was met. That condition had now been triggered by George entering formal preparation for future kingship. One clause demanded that the property remain with the direct future sovereign, instead of being divided between Diana's sons. Harry looked down and saw a second sealed page beneath the order. His anger sharpened into suspicion. He demanded to know what else had been kept from him. But before he could challenge the document, he would have to confront the wound beneath it. What Diana's legacy meant to William, to George, and to the son who suddenly feared he had been left outside it. For William, the estate represents a responsibility he has guarded in silence. For Harry, it represents the last private connection to the mother he lost too soon. And for George, it is an inheritance he never asked to receive. The announcement places all three beneath Diana's shadow, forcing them to confront grief in different forms. One sees duty, another sees rejection. The youngest sees the terrifying cost of becoming the future of the monarchy. William had never viewed Diana's private legacy as a collection of valuable objects. He saw it as something fragile, something that could be damaged if grief, publicity, and royal rivalry were allowed to pull it apart. The protected archive, a secured collection of letters and personal records, mattered because it contained thoughts never intended for public conflict. The prince believed preserving those memories meant keeping them beyond anyone's personal anger, including his own. Harry felt the opposite weight. He did not see constitutional value in familiar rooms, handwritten notes, or objects his mother had once touched. He saw childhood. He saw the parts of Diana that history books could never return. Each glance toward George deepened the ache, not because he blamed the boy, but because the estate had passed around him. The Duke felt as though a door to his own past had been closed by the brother, who understood that loss better than anyone. Catherine watched both men while keeping one hand near George. She understood that William was preparing their son for royal responsibility. But she also saw the hidden cost. The future king was asking a young boy to carry pain that had begun before he was born. George was receiving an estate, yet he was also inheriting the unresolved struggle between two sons, who had never learned how to share their mother's memory without hurting each other. George finally broke the silence. He looked at William, then at Harry, and quietly asked whether becoming sole owner meant his uncle would be forbidden from visiting. The question changed the room. Charles lowered his gaze because nobody had explained the access restrictions. The king then admitted, in a documented statement, preserved by the trustees, that Diana's estate had never been created as a conventional inheritance. It was designed as a protected sanctuary for the descendant who would carry her influence closest to the crown. Harry moved toward the window when the meeting paused. George followed without an aide and told him he had never asked for the estate. The Duke turned and answered that neither of them had asked to inherit the consequences of being Diana's family. William heard every word. Then he told his brother that the decision could not be understood without returning to one private memorial gathering 3 years earlier. The night mistrust stopped being temporary and became the point of no return. The path to George's inheritance began not with a legal signature, but with an argument beneath Diana's portrait. 3 years before William's announcement, the brothers gathered privately to approve the release of several personal letters for a memorial exhibition. What began as a discussion about honoring their mother became a confrontation over ownership, publicity, and trust. By the time Harry walked out, William had reached a private conclusion. Diana's hidden world could never survive if control remained divided. William entered the memorial meeting, determined to keep the discussion controlled. Harry arrived carrying the opposite conviction. The temporary exhibition, a short public display of selected personal objects and documents, had been designed to present Diana's private voice with care. Yet one letter changed everything. It contained her thoughts on motherhood, the crown, and her fear that the institution around her sons might one day pull them apart. Harry argued that the letter should be seen. He believed the public deserved to understand the woman behind the title, not only the polished memory preserved by the palace. William heard something more dangerous. The prince believed releasing those words would turn his mother's deepest fear into worldwide entertainment. For him, protection meant silence. For the Duke, silence felt like another form of control. The argument soon moved beyond the letter. Harry accused his brother of hiding behind royal duty whenever emotion became difficult. William answered that the Duke kept using Diana's memory to justify battles she could no longer speak about herself. Neither man shouted. That made the exchange worse. Every sentence landed with the cold weight of something rehearsed through years of resentment. Harry reached toward the letter before formal approval had been given. A trustee later preserved the moment in a documented account, recording how William immediately folded the page, returned it to its protective sleeve, and shut the archive case. An archive case is a secured container used to protect fragile historical documents from damage or unauthorized access. The future king then ordered the room locked, and the meeting ended. The quiet click of that lock became the true point of no return. Harry stood motionless, watching his brother secure the last words of their mother, as though he had become a threat to them. William watched him leave and understood that shared control would keep turning Diana's memory into a battlefield. That same night, the prince submitted a private written request to the trustees. He asked them to activate the dormant succession clause and begin preparing the estate for transfer to George alone. Harry now understood that the inheritance decision had grown from an incident he believed had been forgiven. The Duke demanded a direct confrontation, without trustees, advisors, or legal language between them. With the hidden cause finally exposed, only 2 brothers remained, and everything they had refused to say was waiting behind one closed door. When the doors closed and the advisors withdrew, the inheritance dispute became something far more dangerous than a royal disagreement. Harry stood across from William and asked the question that had haunted him since the announcement. "Did you ever intend to let me remain part of her legacy?" The future king did not answer immediately. One careless sentence could destroy what remained between them. Yet silence had already caused enough damage. And this time, neither brother could escape. Harry had chosen Diana's former sitting room because neither man could pretend it was ordinary royal property. The space carried memories of private conversations, childhood comfort, and a mother both sons still guarded in different ways. William entered without files or legal advisors. The prince wanted the confrontation to remain personal, not buried beneath an inheritance claim, a formal demand challenging who has the right to receive property. Harry placed both hands on the back of Diana's old chair, but refused to sit. He accused his brother of using George as a shield, turning the boy's future into proof that every painful decision was morally necessary. William stepped closer and answered that protecting his son from inherited conflict was exactly why the estate could not be divided. He would not leave George trapped between competing households, competing stories, and competing claims over the same woman. The Duke's anger finally broke into something more honest. He admitted that learning about the estate from William, instead of from Diana's trustees, made him feel as though his childhood had been officially erased. The future king told him ownership was never meant to measure who their mother loved more. Harry looked at the empty chair and replied that the decision would feel exactly that way, whatever purpose the documents claimed. Harry then demanded the second sealed page. William refused. He said the page would remain closed until his brother admitted why the memorial incident had destroyed the trustees' confidence. The Duke called that punishment disguised as protection. The prince answered that reaching for the letter without approval had proved how quickly grief could overpower judgment. William finally broke his silence through a recorded private conversation preserved by the estate trustees. He confessed that he had not created the sole heir clause. Diana herself had approved its central principle. One future descendant should hold the estate intact, protecting it from division and public exploitation. She could not have known which grandchild would inherit, but the intention had been hers. Harry challenged the interpretation immediately. He demanded proof that their mother's words had not been reshaped to serve William's decision. The future king did not argue again. He opened the door and ordered the original guardian of Diana's instructions to be brought in. Now the brothers would hear from the woman who had protected the estate's oldest secret for decades, and her testimony could either vindicate William or destroy his final defense. The true power behind the inheritance did not belong entirely to William, Harry, or even the crown. It belonged to a handwritten instruction preserved by one elderly trustee who had refused every request to expose it. When Lady Margaret Ashcombe entered the room, carrying a narrow blue case, even Charles rose from his chair. She had protected Diana's private wishes for nearly 3 decades, and she was finally prepared to reveal why George alone now held the estate. Lady Margaret placed the case between the two brothers and waited until the room fell completely silent. As a founding trustee, a person legally appointed to protect property and carry out another person's wishes, she had resisted pressure from courtiers, lawyers, and family members. Through a recorded statement created for the private estate archive, she explained that Diana had deliberately separated the property from ordinary inheritance. Diana feared that money, publicity, and political influence would one day tear her private world apart. She did not want separate households fighting over letters, jewelry, rooms, or memories. The trust therefore required the estate to pass intact to one descendant positioned to shape the monarchy's future. That rule protected the archive from being divided, sold, or used by competing branches of the family. Charles listened with growing regret. Halfway through the reading, the king removed his glasses and placed them beside his untouched tea. He remembered how deeply Diana had feared becoming a source of conflict after her death. Now both sons stood exactly where she had feared they might stand, divided by the things she had hoped would keep them connected. Harry heard the instructions as a judgment. Every sentence seemed to explain why he could not be trusted with equal control. William heard something different. The prince understood the document as a burden he had been forced to enforce, even knowing that obedience might cost him what remained of his relationship with his brother. Lady Margaret opened the narrow case, but revealed only Diana's signature page. The Duke demanded the full instruction. She refused to move faster. The elderly confidant told him that the signature proved authenticity. Yet the most important part was not who received the property. It was what the owner was required to do with it. Lady Margaret then read Diana's final condition from the preserved handwritten order. George would hold complete legal authority, but he also carried a moral duty. The estate had to preserve private family access, support charitable work, and protect the dignity of both Diana's sons. Ownership could never become a weapon of humiliation. Harry looked toward William. The future king remained silent because the decision had suddenly moved beyond him. Lady Margaret closed the case and turned toward George. The documents had established who owned Diana's estate. Now the young heir's first choice would decide whether his uncle remained welcome inside it, or whether the gates would close forever. George entered the estate as its legal owner, but no celebration waited for him. The keys felt heavy in his hand. The rooms carried memories he had never personally lived, and every adult watched to see which side he would choose. Harry feared the gates would close. William feared his son would be manipulated by guilt. Yet the young heir's first reaction was neither pride nor confusion. It was sorrow that Diana's sanctuary had become another battlefield. William signed the final guardianship acknowledgement moments after the trustees authenticated Diana's instructions. A guardianship acknowledgement is a formal document confirming who will supervise major decisions until a young owner can act independently. The transfer became effective immediately. George now legally owned the residence, garden, archive, memorial room, and private collection, although important changes still required his written consent and a limited trustee review. Catherine found her son standing silently inside Diana's private library. George told his mother that everyone seemed to be losing something because he had inherited it. The princess understood what frightened him. He had received valuable property, but he had also inherited the unresolved grief of two brothers who had spent years fighting over how their mother should be remembered. William joined them and chose his words carefully. The prince explained that duty sometimes meant accepting responsibility without enjoying the power attached to it. He reminded George that keeping the estate intact protected Diana's private letters from being divided, sold, or turned into weapons during future family disputes. Yet the future king also knew that asking his son to carry this burden could harden the boy, unless compassion remained part of every decision. Harry received the formal access letter alone in a quiet corridor. An access letter is a written notice defining where someone may enter and what rights they hold inside private property. The Duke stared at the envelope, convinced it contained another rejection. His hand paused over the seal because he was already preparing to learn that his mother's home had become a place he could visit only under strict permission. Harry finally opened it. The official terms granted him lifelong private access to Diana's residence, garden, memorial room, and family archive. He could enter without public announcement and bring his children. He could not remove, copy, sell, or publish protected material. Then he noticed a handwritten sentence beneath the legal wording. "You should never need permission to remember your mother." The Duke's anger weakened instantly. He sat down before reaching the final page and read the sentence again. George had offered him belonging without surrendering control. For the first time, the conflict was no longer about what William had denied Harry. It was about whether the Duke could accept what his nephew had freely chosen to give him, and whether a place inside Diana's legacy would be enough without ownership of it. The turning point came without lawyers, titles, or palace witnesses. George asked Harry to walk with him through Diana's private garden, the one place inside the estate where ownership seemed meaningless. His uncle expected a carefully rehearsed royal message. Instead, the young heir spoke with painful honesty. He admitted that he feared inheriting a family in which every gift became a grievance. Harry had to decide whether to protect the boy from that pattern or continue it. George chose the garden because Diana had created it as a place of silence and emotional refuge. William deliberately remained behind. No aides followed, no trustees listened, and no guards stood close enough to shape the conversation. For once, the inheritance would be discussed without legal language or palace pressure. Only an uncle and his nephew remained, connected by a woman one remembered and the other knew through stories. George admitted that becoming sole owner filled him with guilt. He had not created the trust, a legal arrangement that protects property and controls how it is passed on. He had not activated its conditions or asked to stand between William and Harry. Yet every signature now carried his name, making him appear to have gained something from a wound that had never healed. Harry listened carefully. Then he told George that the shock had not come from believing the boy was undeserving. It came from feeling excluded by William. The Duke explained that learning about the estate only after the decision had been completed made him feel as though another piece of Diana had been locked away from him. His anger belonged to that rejection, not to his nephew. George asked the question neither of them could avoid. Did Harry intend to challenge the inheritance legally? A legal challenge is a formal attempt to overturn a decision through trustees or a court. The Duke paused. The silence lasted long enough for the young heir to understand that the possibility had been real. Harry finally gave his answer through a recorded private agreement, prepared after their conversation. He promised not to contest George's ownership, and accepted the lifelong access arrangement. He asked for only one protection. Diana's private letters must never be used for political advantage by William, by him, or by any future household. George agreed without hesitation. The young heir removed the estate key from his pocket and offered it to Harry. The Duke gently closed George's hand around it and said the key belonged with the owner. Then he placed his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Refusal became acceptance. Their private peace was genuine. But outside the garden walls, news of Diana's secret estate had escaped the palace, and the world was already preparing to turn their quiet agreement into the biggest royal headline of the year. By sunrise, the private agreement had become a global royal earthquake. Newsrooms abandoned scheduled broadcasts, palace correspondents gathered outside Windsor, and Diana's name once again dominated every front page. Yet the image that captured the public was not William signing the order, or Harry reacting in shock. It was George walking beside his uncle after their garden conversation. An heir and an outsider leaving together, united by the woman whose legacy had nearly divided them forever. William read the palace statement twice before approving its release. The message confirmed George as sole owner, while stressing that the estate would remain private, protected, and partly dedicated to charitable work. A palace statement is an official public announcement issued on behalf of the royal household. And every word mattered, because one careless phrase could make the young heir appear victorious, while Harry appeared cast aside. Catherine immediately saw the danger. She told William that George must not become the symbol of a family defeat. The princess understood that the inheritance could prepare their son to carry Diana's humanitarian influence into the next generation. But she also knew how quickly public admiration could become pressure. The prince agreed, yet he feared the story had already escaped their control. Harry became the focus of every headline. Broadcasters called him stunned and waited for anger, accusation, or another public rupture with William. The Duke gave them none. Through a recorded response delivered to the palace press office, he stated that George's ownership had been accepted and that Diana's private legacy deserved protection, rather than another family war. The speculation only grew louder. Commentators debated whether the transfer marked William's final consolidation of Diana's memory around the direct line of succession, the branch of the family moving immediately toward the throne. Some called the decision strategic. Others called it ruthless. Few understood that George had already granted his uncle lifelong access. Then the palace released one decisive fact. Harry had formally waived any challenge to the estate. A waiver is a written decision surrendering the right to contest something later. That single detail transformed the story. The Duke had not been defeated. He had chosen peace. A special evening broadcast opened with the headline, "Diana's legacy passes to George." Outside Kensington Palace, a crowd gathered beneath the gates and left white roses beside a photograph of George and Harry walking shoulder to shoulder after their agreement. The public dispute was over, but the emotional verdict remained unwritten. Once the headlines faded, William, Harry, and George returned to Diana's estate together to decide whether her inheritance would remain a symbol of division or become the place where that division finally ended. The final verdict was not written in the ownership order. It emerged when William, Harry, and George entered Diana's memorial room together. George owned the estate. William remained its guardian. Harry remained the son whose memories could never be reduced to a legal share. For years, Diana's legacy had been treated as something that needed to be divided to become fair. Instead, the family discovered that one person could hold the keys while everyone she loved could still belong. George stood before William, Harry, Catherine, Charles, and Lady Margaret as the private ceremony began. A family charter, a formal agreement defining how relatives will protect shared values and responsibilities, rested before him. The young heir signed it to preserve the estate as a private sanctuary, a historical archive, and a charitable foundation shaped by Diana's humanitarian work. His ownership would remain complete, but its purpose would reach far beyond possession. William turned toward Harry before the witnesses could move. The prince apologized for allowing legal secrecy to feel like personal rejection. He admitted through the recorded ceremony account that he should have spoken to his brother before the final announcement. Yet the future king also maintained that unified ownership had been necessary. Dividing the estate could have divided the archive, weakened its protection, and turned Diana's private memory into another public battlefield. Harry listened, then faced George. The Duke admitted that his first reaction had come from old grief, rather than his nephew's intentions. He had mistaken exclusion from control for exclusion from love. Harry told the young heir that Diana would have valued compassion more than possession, and George had shown more compassion than many adults surrounding the decision. George then announced his first permanent appointment. William and Harry would become honorary guardians of Diana's personal memory, a symbolic role giving them equal voices on charitable and commemorative matters without dividing legal ownership. The brothers would not control the estate together, but neither could be erased from the legacy it protected. Lady Margaret opened the second sealed page and read Diana's final instruction from the documented trust record. The estate must never reward one descendant by humiliating another. George's decision to preserve Harry's lifelong access had fulfilled that condition. The inheritance had not created a winner and a loser. It had placed duty in one pair of hands, while protecting dignity in all of them. George signed the charter and passed the pen first to William, then to Harry. Neither brother signed as an owner. They signed as witnesses. The future king extended his hand across the table, but the Duke ignored the formality and pulled him into a brief embrace. Diana's estate belonged legally to George, yet its emotional meaning belonged to all three. William had protected it. Harry had chosen peace. George had transformed inheritance into belonging. The final victory was not control, wealth, or royal power. It was the refusal to let inherited pain destroy another generation. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.